Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We are going to be getting started here in about 30, 45 seconds, somewhere in there. But I'd like to thank you for joining our concurrent session with Adam Saenz after his keynote. And we will be joining, let me go ahead and spotlight him if I could find his video. There we go. Perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and just get right into it. You all were here for the keynote, and if you weren't, Dr. Adam Saenz provided an amazing keynote session. If you haven't watched it, watch it on demand. It'll be available in about a week. It was incredibly inspiring, and even I got a little bit of stress relief from it. So I'm going to return it right over to Adam and let you take it away.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Thomas. I appreciate that. Good to be with you. Thanks for coming back. I'm a psychologist, and my task today, my goal today is to help you go inside, explore the inner world. And we started that this morning. I started that this morning by talking about stress management as a domain of internal grist for the mill, as we say in therapy. When I think about going into my inner world and understanding it and regulating it, certainly understanding my stress is a key part of that. So that was the keynote session. Now we're going to follow up with talking about emotions, another thing that goes on inside of me that I need to be aware of. So here's what I want to do. Go to the chat. I see we have 27 people on the call. Let me know what you do. Classroom teacher, building level administrator, district or corporation level. Let's see what we got so that I can know how to sort of differentiate the instruction. Teacher, awesome. Yeah, teacher, Angela, awesome. Just exactly good deal. Okay, so some of this application will be, it'll be twofold. I will help you. I'll give you a roadmap to manage your own emotions, and then I will give you a roadmap to help your students manage their emotions. So it looks like we've got some classroom-based folks. That's awesome. So here's what I want to do. Let's see. Let's do some sentence completion. So go to the chat and finish this sentence. On the last day of no, let's go back. Let's go back even further. On the first day of school last year, so I guess it was last August or September, most of you went back in August, I felt what? How did you feel when you started the school year last year? So let's go to the chat. I'll play some jams. Fearful. Amen. Yeah, nervous. Yeah, absolutely. Leslie was excited. Good, good. I felt, oh, good. Yeah, apprehensive. How did I feel? I felt drained on the first day of school. I felt drained. My prognosis was poor, and that was in August. I was drained. By Labor Day, I was depleted, having no idea how I was going to get through the school year. So let's do this now. Most of you have already been through your last day of school this year. How did you feel on your last day of school? I felt drained, but I'm gonna put, I also felt hopeful. Yeah, exhausted. Yep. Yeah, ready to be done for sure. Okay. Yeah, those are all legitimate. So all this emotion, when we started last year, as we end this year, we're filled with emotion. And then coming back in August, I know we'll have a lot of emotion as well. So we're going to talk about what do we do with all that emotion. So let's go to the PowerPoint here, a roadmap for managing emotion. So this morning, when I gave the keynote, again, I talked about stress management. That's adult SEL. So when we do our SEL training for schools, half of the training, the first part is adult SEL. So what do I as an adult need to be aware of and regulating? And then the second half is student focused SEL. How can I help my students increase self-awareness and self-regulation? So the first session was about adult SEL. This will really be more student-focused SEL, but there's application at an adult level. So let's talk about that. Remember, this is the roadmap. If we're going to do social and emotional learning, these are the things we want to have in place. It starts with self-awareness, and then we go to self-management. I can't manage what I'm not aware of. So self-awareness is key. Then I can manage it. Once I'm self-aware and self-regulated, that increases my capacity for empathy or social awareness. And then I can connect with you using relationship skills, and then we can make good decisions. And responsible decision-making, what does that look like? Well, it's the teacher. Well, let's start with the student. It's a student saying, I'm angry, and I have choices. I can express that anger by going to an adult and saying, I feel really angry. I can draw a picture that shows how angry I am, or I can bring a gun to school to express how angry I am. So responsible decision-making for a student says, rather than resorting to violence to express my emotion, let me use my words. So that's responsible decision-making. What does it look like for a classroom teacher? Classroom teacher is burned out, exhausted, overwhelmed, understandably. But that teacher says, I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to be self-regulated and self-aware. And so that I really want to go off on the student and let them know what's up. But instead of doing that, I'm going to take 5 deep breaths and calm myself before I interact with that student. That's responsible decision-making. And there are responsible decisions we make every day, you know. So in my role as a husband, in my role as a father, in my role as a psychologist, in your role as a classroom teacher, every moment life is asking us to make a decision, you know, and the goal is to make responsible, adaptive decisions, to make the best decisions for our lives, right? Well, we see in this graphic here that to get to this place of responsible decision-making, to get to this yellow area here, we've kind of got to go through this journey of self-awareness, self-management, empathy, and social skills to get here. So again, this whole, you know, this morning and this workshop now is all about really this first part of that. Another way to think of it starts with self-awareness and self-regulation. When I add to that empathy and social skills, then I make good decisions. Then I can manage my emotions effectively. Another way to think of it, again, we're focusing on the left half of the equation, being self-aware and self-regulated. Well, Adam, what do I need to be aware of so that I can regulate? 3 things. Number 1 is my personality, and that's pretty stable, like the climate. Number 2 is my emotion, and that's weather. And number 3 is my stress, and those are like storms. So earlier I talked about storms. How do we manage our stress? How do we go inside of ourselves to manage and regulate that storm? Now I'm going to talk about emotions. And just like the weather, emotions can change from moment to moment, you know. And so, you know, we've got a lot of emotion on the table. So let's talk about what we do with it. So here's the deal on this. And I want to go back to something that I talked about earlier in my keynote. And you know, I said in the keynote that in my opinion, schools are becoming the front line of mental health intervention. And that's not because of the pandemic. The pandemic just highlighted that reality or made it even more of a reality. But, you know, if you look back to 2001, this is a picture of Bradley Hospital. And that's where I did my postdoc at Brown Medical School. And the deal was, you know, this was like a inpatient, outpatient, partial program for kids between as young as 3 all the way through 18. And this circle drive here, we knew that when either a police car or an ambulance or a minivan or something rolled around in that circle drive and a child was brought into the front door, it was all hands on deck. And we would come in and do an intake of that child, and that child would get, I mean, just the state-of-the-art mental health intervention. So individual therapy, group therapy, family therapy, they would get social work, occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy, nutrition, psychiatry. I mean, any service that a child could receive, they would get it there. It was the front line of mental health intervention. Fast forward to 2021, and now I think, again, it's a public high school. It's the average public high school in anywhere USA is the front line of mental health intervention. And, you know, I remember a year ago, a lot of people were talking about, look at this chaos, look at the emotional chaos the pandemic is causing, you know, our kids. And, you know, as somebody who's been in the field for 20 years, I remember thinking like the pandemic didn't cause this. It just exposed it. This stuff has been here all this while. All this emotional turmoil has been here. And I remember like all the way back in 2010, 2011, it seemed like every year we would look at each other, you know, when school would start, and we'd sort of say like, is it just me, or are kids more and more troubled than they've ever been? Like, are they bringing more and more emotional baggage to schools than ever before? And every year it seemed like it was getting, you know, like the emotional waters were rising and rising. So when the pandemic came around and people were saying like, oh my gosh, look at how our kids are struggling. I was thinking like the pandemic didn't cause it. It just exposed it. That's been the reality for a while. But most of us who don't work in education have been in denial about it, you know, just had no idea. But now that, you know, then this year of parents having to teach their children and kids being at home and all that other stuff, I think a lot of us sort of woke up and smelled the coffee, that the, you know, the emotion was going, you know, through the roof. So I don't think that's going to be anything less in the fall. In some ways, it'll be easier than last year because we're not doing the hybrid models of instruction. And even if we have to, we know how to do that better than we did a year ago. So in some levels, I think that the spike of anxiety, the spike of fear and all of that will taper off, and we'll come back and we'll be, I think, in a better place in August when school starts. But I also think that we're still going to have a lot of emotional heavy lifting to do as we work through our feelings. You know, some kids haven't even been in a school for months and months and months and months, and haven't sat in a classroom and haven't stood in a lunch line, and they're going to have a lot of emotion. Some of it's going to be excitement, but some of it's going to be anger. Some of it's going to be frustration, anxiety. And those are the kids. And then we have the adults who are also feeling this. So there will be a lot of emotion in our schools in August. So that's what's going on. Now, here's the deal with the all that emotional stuff. Let me tell you why our tools aren't working in schools. So here's what I mean by that. We've known, you know, that kids come to school with emotional problems. And we've known that these kids, like, education is it, like the school system is where if they're going to get help, it's going to be in the school. It's not going to be in an outpatient clinic or in a psychiatric hospital. It will be in the school. And we've known that and have been working toward that. And so what we've used historically to help kids is rooted in behavioral psychology. So when I say behavioral psychology, basically I'm talking about like just behavior management principles. And those essentially, you have two drawers in that toolbox. In the toolbox of behavioral psychology, you have two drawers. And in one drawer, you have carrots, and in one drawer, you have sticks. I'm sorry, before I get to the carrots and sticks, let me just share some data. This is from the National Institute of Mental Health. 20% of the youth between the ages of 13 and 18 are experiencing a severe mental disorder. And again, this was pre-pandemic. So my guess is that those numbers are even higher, maybe up to half, who knows. And out of those, less than half of them are going to get treatment for a severe, not mild and not moderate, but for severe mental illness. And so again, even before the pandemic, we knew that kids had significant needs that weren't being met, which is, again, why schools were becoming the front line of mental health intervention. So now back to carrots and sticks. What we've used in schools is behavioral psychology, which again is carrots and sticks. So sticks, office referrals, in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension. Those were the kind of the punitive measures that we've used. And those really reached a peak in the 70s, through the 70s and early 80s. Lots of suspensions, lots of expulsions. And, you know, there's this axiom in psychology, and that is this: if the behavior doesn't change, the intervention's not working. It's just real straightforward. If the behavior doesn't change, the intervention's not working. So the intervention of these sticks was supposed to have been to increase academic performance, you know? So let's refer them to the office. Let's basically induce fear into kids, and maybe that will make them wake up and engage academically because they don't want these negative consequences. Well, what we found over time is that there was an inverse relationship. There was an inverse correlation. So where office referrals and suspensions and those punitive measures went up, academic achievement went down. And we started seeing that across the country, that there was an inverse relationship between the punitive measures and academic achievement. So finally, we started figuring out that while there's a time and a place for a student to be expelled, if that's our go-to intervention when kids are struggling, we're going to have a problem because they won't gain academically. So then what happened was, this positive behavior intervention and supports, we started saying, let's focus on the carrots, like we can ignore mildly inappropriate behavior. We can redirect the behavior. We can offer social praise, reinforcement. So then the shift in the 90s and the 2000s was on, let's focus on the carrots. So let's lay out as many carrots as we can lay out and make it a positive culture and a positive climate. Instead of like, I'm going to get you, I'm going to suspend you. Let's be more positive in our approach, which was great, I thought. So then we started looking at different tiers of intervention, and tier 1 positive behavior supports, and tier 2 positive behavior supports, and tier 3 positive behavior supports. All of which is great. So that's how we've treated, kids who come to school that have needs. We've used sticks, and then we started moving into carrots. And then in school, we had this one huge power tool, and that's called special ed. And what that means is when kids are really, really struggling, special ed is where the services are, speech, OT, occupational therapy, emotional disturbance, learning disability. It's in special ed. So there was this huge pressure to qualify kids for special ed services, just to get them help. Well, what happened in our zeal to help kids is that we ended up overqualifying kids for special ed. And then what that did was diluted the special ed services for kids that really did have legitimate disabilities. And so then you had, disproportionate representation or overrepresentation in special ed, and kids were being identified that really weren't disabled, but we were just trying to help them. And it was just sort of a mess, and again, that was all pre-pandemic, and it still happens to some degree. So that's it. Kids are coming to us with more and more emotional needs, and this is what we have to intervene with that. Now, the problem with all of this is this. Acting out behavior is usually a symptom of a deeper issue, like emotional distress. So a commitment to behavior management is, in fact, a commitment to symptom management. A commitment to behavior management is a commitment to symptom management. So what that means is that as long as I'm using carrot and sticks, which are really designed just to shape behavior, it's all that sort of, Pavlov's dogs and making dogs salivate when they hear a bell. I mean, it's all of that focus on behavior. And while there's a time and a place for that, if the real issue is underlying emotional turmoil, and we never deal with the underlying emotional turmoil, we can try to shape behavior till the cows come home, but we're really not getting to the root issue. It's sort of like saying you have a wound, or let's say you have a cold, and the problem is the fever, or one symptom of the cold or the flu is the fever, right? And so then you say, well, I know, let's put ice on their forehead. That'll make their forehead cooler. Yeah, I mean, so that makes their forehead cooler, but it's just treating a symptom. It's really not getting to the underlying pathology. And that's sort of what happens with behavior management. When we start committing to behavior management and focusing on sticks and carrots and shaping behavior without dealing with the underlying emotion, then we're going to be behind the 8 ball the whole week, the whole semester, the whole year, because we never get to the bottom line, which is emotion. So the whole goal of social and emotional learning is about increasing emotional literacy, meaning what is the emotion and how can I regulate the emotion? And I always say, when we can learn to regulate emotion, when we can manage emotion, behavior manages itself. When we manage emotion, behavior manages itself. So that's what this whole thing is about. It's about us understanding, I got to go into my inner world. Instead of looking at superficial behaviors, I've got to go into my inner world. Okay. So remember, this is what SEL looks like: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. Back to this. The different way to represent that graphic. So what I'm going to do now, so this morning, I talked about stress management as something that I need to be aware of. And then I gave you strategies to regulate that thing that you are now aware of. Now we're going to talk about emotion. Emotion is another thing inside of me that I need to be aware of and that I need to regulate. And once I deal with my own emotion and regulate my emotion, I can have more empathy and better social skills to make good decisions. So let's talk about this. I'm going to talk about 5 ways that we can deal with emotion. So I use the phrase emotional literacy a lot, and it's like literacy, regular, like language arts literacy. Emotional literacy is being able to identify an emotion and then being able to regulate it. Language arts literacy is being able to recognize a letter, pair those letters into words, pronounce sounds, and associate those sounds with an object in the real world or some kind of reality in the real world. So those words are symbols that represent something in the world around me. That's regular literacy. And I'm going to come back to that analogy as I talk through this. So think about it. Kids are going to be coming into the classroom, and we as adults are coming into the classroom with all of this emotion. And these are the different ways that I can respond to emotion. Number 1, ignore it. And just some way act like it's not there. And what does ignoring emotion look like? It's just this idea that, like someone asked this morning, what do we do? How can we help administrators focus on stress management for teachers? If an administrator is ignoring stress and in denial about stress, there's no way you can manage it, because you can't manage what you're not aware of. Same thing with emotion. When I'm not acknowledging emotion, when I, as a classroom level leader or a campus level leader, and doing this and saying, nope, we're not anxious. Nope, whatever, I just don't want to deal with it. Then I never get to a place of developing emotional literacy if I'm ignoring it. So think of it this way. Imagine my task was to teach you to read. And so, okay, well, that starts with the alphabet. And what if I ignored the alphabet and said, nope, no letters in here. I don't see what letters. How am I ever going to get to a place of literacy? I don't. So when we ignore emotion, in some way act like it's not there, we are limiting ourselves. And let me tell you this. This is going to sound sexist, but there's data to prove it. Men in America, anyway, are acculturated to ignore emotion. Guys are taught from a young age, you cut off your emotion. You hear this real pejorative language, like, don't be a sissy, suck it up, get out there and that kind of stuff. When we use that language with kids, we're teaching them to repress emotion. We're teaching them to ignore emotion. And there's a time and a place for that, but that can't be our go-to strategy. So that's it. If I'm ignoring emotion, then I'm stuck. I will never get to a place of literacy. Next step, inhibit emotion, or next option is to inhibit emotion. Restrict my students from experiencing challenging challenging feelings. So what that sounds like is this. Inhibiting emotion is, what, you're angry? I don't want to hear it. You leave your anger outside. When you come in here, we're not angry in here. We don't do anger in this classroom. You're sad. Well, hey, you leave your sad at home. Imagine if you were a teacher and your principal said, what, you're stressed out? I'll tell you what, when you step into this building, you leave your stress in the car, right? You just put it in your car. It'll be there when you get done. You're angry right now as a teacher. I'll tell you what, leave your anger in the car. You leave it at home. You don't bring your anger up here. Can you imagine what a toxic place that would be? It's crazy for me to think about that. So when we inhibit emotion and tell kids they can't bring emotion into the classroom, we never get to a place of emotional literacy. So we can ignore emotion, we can inhibit it. Here's the next one, invalidate emotion. Tell my students that they're wrong to feel how they feel. What does that sound like? What, you're angry, student? You shouldn't be angry. You should be happy that you have an amazing teacher like me. I love you and I care about you. So you need to turn that frown upside down and we're going to have a great day today. That's invalidating emotion. So the bottom line with emotion is that, we have permission to feel whatever we feel. So when I asked teachers, how did you feel about the pandemic? Most said, I felt overwhelmed. I felt ineffective. I felt incompetent. I felt frustrated. I felt depressed, great. And then some teachers said, I kind of felt excited because I was learning how to teach in a way that I'd never taught before. And I was really hopeful because I realized if I can do it now, then I'm going to be even better next year. Whatever the range of emotion was, teachers are free to feel whatever they feel, and the same thing is true with kids. It's never my job, and it's never your job to tell anyone else how they should feel. Well, you should feel grateful. Well, you should feel happy. Well, you should feel angry. Nobody should feel anything. We feel what we feel. Feelings aren't right or wrong. There isn't a right feeling or a wrong feeling. They're just feelings, and they come out and we deal with them. So when we, again, back to the PowerPoint here, when we invalidate emotion, we're telling that they're wrong to feel how they're feeling. We never get to a place of emotional literacy. So and when we do those three things, when we ignore, inhibit, or invalidate emotion, we never get to a place where we can actually teach and instruct emotion. Now, step 4, this one's scary. Invite emotion. Tell my students that all feelings are welcome. Oh my gosh. Are you kidding me? That's crazy. So when you think about the word emotion, what that word means, emotion in the Latin, it comes from the root Latin movere, which means to move. It implies energy, it implies power, it implies force. And we use that language, like we'll say, oh, you know, that music is so moving, it touched me, you know, it moves me, it compels me to action. That's what emotion is. Emotion is like a packet of energy. Any emotion, sadness, anger, frustration, hope, joy, all of those emotions are little packets of energy. So you think about that, you're saying, wait, Adam, you're telling me that I need to invite kids to bring emotion to the table? That's scary, because what you're saying is you're inviting kids to bring all of those packets of energy to the table. You know, bring that natural gas, bring that propane, bring that diesel, bring the electricity, bring those strong winds, bring it all to the table. I mean, that's scary, you know, when you think about the explosive potential of all of that energy. So this idea that I'm going to invite emotion and tell students that all feelings are welcome, that can be really, really scary, because what if somebody lights a match and this whole thing goes up in smoke and we're being all emotional and everything explodes? Yep, that's a risk that you run. That's a risk that you run. But what we do then is when we invite emotion, we want to invite emotion because then we can instruct emotion. And it's not until we get to a place of actually instructing emotion that we can develop emotional literacy. So it's like, again, back to the idea of language arts literacy. If my job or my task is to teach literacy so that you can see how these symbols create sounds that represent realities in the outer world, if that's the big picture, then my goal is to help you understand with emotional literacy, this is the emotion, this is what it feels like, and this is how you can manage it. I want to invite letters so that we can learn letters, and I want to invite emotion so that we can instruct emotion. So what does that look like then to actually instruct emotion? Well, it looks like this. There are 5 steps. And this is true at an adult level and at a student level. So let's talk about how we actually instruct emotion. This is where we develop emotional literacy. Number 1, how do we instruct emotion? Number 1, identify the feeling using a feeling chart and any other cues. For example, you could say, hey, Adam, looks like you're feeling angry. I see that your fists are clenched and your eyebrows are squished. Your face looks like this one on the feelings chart. So when I say feelings chart, this is on the back of all of our SEL notebooks, the feelings chart. So this feelings chart here, this is, you know, I remember back in, I guess it was 3rd grade, we all had on our desk, our teacher put a piece of tape across the top of our desk, and it had all the letters. And that's how we practice writing our letters and recognizing sounds and stuff like that. This is the equivalent, the emotional equivalent of that letter, you know, of the tape with letters on it. This is the basics. So we use this feelings chart and say, hey, Adam, it looks like you're mad because you look like this kid right here, you know, your cheeks are red and your eyebrows are squished, and, you know, and so what we're doing in this one step where we say, it looks like you're feeling angry, I see that your fists are clenched, you're helping the student learn how to name their feelings. To name it is to claim it, as they say. So name the feeling. And because a lot of times you'll ask a student, how you feeling? I don't know, you know, I don't know, whatever. Okay, well, let me help you then. And so then you use this language. So you help them to develop language to identify feelings. And you're also modeling empathy. You're teaching students that you can just look at somebody and tell what they're feeling. Their bodies are giving you clues about what's going on in their inner world. And that's a powerful, powerful step right there. You know, when you just say you look angry because your face looks like this and your hands look like that, you're, again, modeling empathy. So that's a powerful first step. So number 1, identify the feeling using a feelings chart and any other cues. Okay, looks like you're feeling angry. Next one, step 2, validate the feeling. Say, hey, Adam, it's okay to feel angry. Sometimes I feel angry when people ask me to do things I don't really want to do, you know? Just the other day, for example, my wife asked me to take out the trash and I didn't want to do it, but I knew I had to, and I got angry, you know? So the powerful part of this step here of validating the feeling is that you're telling them there's nothing wrong with you. You're feeling what you're feeling and it's okay. And not only is there nothing wrong with you, sometimes I'm exactly the way you are, you know? So we're a lot alike. We both get angry sometimes. And so you're developing an alliance with the student at that point. You know, you're letting them know that you share their experience. So let's go back. Remember this idea that we're not talking about behavior management. We're talking about emotion management. Let's go back to this. Step one here. Identify the feeling using a feelings chart. So let's say that you've got Adam in your class and you can tell he's angry and, you know, you could go one of two routes. Am I going to focus on the behavior? Or am I going to focus on the feeling? If you focus on behavior, you see Adam get angry, you start going down the stick and carrot route, you know, like, Adam, you better watch what you say, or I'm going to give you a consequence. You're going to lose recess. Or Adam, if you can say nice things, I'll give you a check mark. You know, you're focusing on the behavior of that. This is how the roadmap differs, though. Now we're focusing on feelings and really getting into their inner world. So you can see that, you know, it's a very different roadmap when you start focusing on emotions versus focusing on behavior. So you validate the feeling and let them know it's okay to feel the way that they feel. Step three is you link the feeling with the maladaptive behavior. Say, hey, Adam, listen, man, I know you're angry. I get angry too, but when you feel angry, I've seen you use your body to hurt other people. You know, when you get angry, I've seen you hit people, or I've seen you destroy property, you know, that's just not helpful, right? So you link it with the maladaptive behavior to help them connect it. And then you offer a substitute behavior. You say, Adam, it's okay to be angry, but it's not okay to hurt somebody. It's not okay to tear up property. It's not okay to cuss people out. Next time you feel angry, please take 5 deep breaths, just like you do when we find our learning place. Okay, so this step here is really the core step, you know, offering the substitute behavior. So back to the idea of emotion as fuel. So let's say you're sitting somewhere and you have a table, and then on the table you have a tank of gas, a tank of diesel, you've got a battery, you know, you've got maybe, you know, whatever else, propane, all these fuel sources, electricity. And you're thinking, my gosh, that could be powerful. That could be explosive. That could hurt people. Yes. But if I'm an engineer, I think of it differently. I think that gasoline is power. And if I put the gasoline in my truck, that gasoline can be a blessing because I can use my truck to give you a ride. That it could fuel a machine that will make my life easier. That electricity, if I connect the electricity to my computer, the computer becomes a machine that makes my life better. That natural gas, if I connect that to my stove becomes a machine that makes my life better. So with that analogy, that's what we're doing with emotion. We're telling kids, bring your emotion to the table, and then let me show you how to connect the fuel of that emotion to a behavior that will make your life better, instead of making your life more complicated. So you can take the anger and you can destroy property, and there will be negative consequences for that. Or you can take the anger and do something different with it, engage in a different behavior that will make your life more productive. So you say, Adam, it's okay to be angry, but it's not okay to hurt people. Next time you feel angry, please take 5 deep breaths. And so now you're connecting that fuel to an adaptive machine, an adaptive behavior, just like we do when we find our learning place. So what do I mean by learning place? Well, learning place is, it's your frontal lobe, basically. You know, I work with student athletes a lot at Texas A&M, we use emotional intelligence to increase peak performance in athletic performance. And so the learning place is basically, it refers to your frontal lobe. So I'm going to turn sideways here. So this is the frontal lobe up here, and this is the brainstem. This is where emotion happens back here. You know, fight or flight happens back here, and higher order thinking happens up here. And so I tell students all the time, I said, you have to think of a mullet, and kids still know what, actually the mullets are coming back. I want to get one. But a mullet is this, it's business in front, party in back, you know, and the kids never forget it when I say that. So when you talk about emotion, it's business in front, party in the back. The emotion happens back here, but the learning place happens up here in your frontal lobe. So the question is, how do you get from back here from your fight or flight emotion brain up here to your rational thinking brain. You breathe. It's that simple. Breathing, the physical act of breathing, regulates our parasympathetic nervous system. So sympathetic nervous system is fight or flight. That's back here. Parasympathetic nervous system is rest and digest. And when we get into that calm, relaxed state, then we move into our frontal lobe. So that happens over a series of lessons with kids in our curricula. That's what we mean when we say take deep breaths to find your learning place. It's find your frontal lobe, because breathing, again, it calms us, it regulates us, and it gets our parasympathetic nervous system activated. So that's it. Number 4 is you offer a substitute behavior. And then the last step of these 5 steps is you reward any approximation or replacement of the replacement behavior. So you say, thank you for taking 1 deep breath. I really appreciate that. Maybe next week you can take 2. So let me explain what I mean by that, this idea of rewarding any approximation of the replacement behavior. Here's the deal. Here's how that usually plays out. So let's say you're in class and you've got your Adam in class, and he's got a problem with anger management. He doesn't want to be in school. This sucks, and I don't want to be here. So that's Adam. He's in your class. And you're thinking, okay, I'm supposed to invite emotion. As scary as that sounds, I'm not going to inhibit it. I'm not going to ignore it. I'm not going to invalidate it. I'm going to invite it so that I can instruct it. Good for me here. Round of applause. Good job for me, teacher. So there's Adam, and he comes in day 1, he's mad. And then you say, Adam, it looks like how are you feeling? And Adam says, I don't know. You say, well, it looks like you're feeling angry because your face is like this and you look like that, right? And Adam says, whatever, and you say, hey, it's okay to feel angry. I felt angry, when I got stuck in traffic too. So I'm just like you. But it's not okay to destroy your paper. So I want you to take 5 breaths, the way that we practice. And so Adam's going, oh, this is so stupid, whatever. And so come on, Adam, let's just take 5 deep breaths. And so Adam goes, all right, there's 1, there's 2. This is so stupid. I can't believe I do this. I hate you. I hate school. You suck. Right. And so then, it's womp womp at that point. So you as an adult are thinking like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me, man? I'm trying so hard with Adam, I'm trying to do the right thing. And I patiently walked him through all of this, and he can't even take 5 deep breaths. Like, this isn't working. This isn't working. That's really tempting as an adult to get into that frustration. And then you start to catastrophize and thinking, what's the point? But that's where adult SEL kicks in, and I have to think about how do I regulate my own emotion as an adult in that situation. So then I stop and breathe and say, back to the slide here, you say, Adam, thank you for taking 1 deep breath. I really appreciate that. Maybe you can take 2 next week, So you're rewarding any approximation of the replacement behavior, but that's hard to do because this, by definition, is an emotionally draining process. So it's very important for me as the adult to regulate my own emotion as we're walking through this, and to practice the breathing exercises and everything else so that I can stay regulated, so that when Adam gives me a little bit of progress, instead of being discouraged or frustrated with Adam, I can say, thank you for that little bit, man. Tomorrow, I'd love it to be this. Maybe next week it'll be this. Maybe by the end of the semester, it'll be this, so good job, keep it up. Not easy to do. It's not easy to do, but that's who we need to be as adults in the classroom when we're helping kids learn to regulate their emotion. So you see this as a deeper work than behavior management. Behavior management and the sticker charts and all that, there's a time and a place for it, absolutely. But it doesn't get to the deeper issue of managing emotion. And the deeper issue is it's a lot of work. Okay, so there we go. Those are the 5 steps. Let me just review those very quickly. Well, let's go all the way back. How can I respond to emotion? Number 1, I can ignore it. Number 2, I can inhibit it. Number 3, I can invalidate it. Now, number 4, though, finally we get to a good place. When I invite emotion, then I can actually instruct it. And how do I instruct it? Number 1, I identify the feeling. Number 2, I validate the feeling. Number 3, I link the feeling with a maladaptive behavior. Number 4, I offer a substitute behavior. And number 5, I reward any approximation of the replacement behavior. So that's the roadmap for managing emotion. So here's a couple of insights here. When we ignore, inhibit, or invalidate emotion, we're practicing repression. It's only when we invite and instruct emotion that we practice emotional literacy. There's a time and a place, you know, to ignore emotion, to inhibit it, or to not to invalidate it. There's a time and a place to ignore it or to inhibit it, but very, very rarely. As a general rule, when we engage in those behaviors, we're just stuffing it. We're stuffing it. We're stuffing emotion, and stuffed emotion, because emotion is energy, right? So when I start stuffing my feelings, essentially I'm stuffing energy. And so imagine that. Imagine that I lived on an acre of land, and every day, for some reason, I ended up with a gallon of gasoline or a gallon of propane, like a tank of propane gas. And let's just say, like, I don't know what to do with this. This stuff is potentially hazardous. Let me bury it. And every day, that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to bury it and bury it and bury it and bury it. And then I'm thinking, like, out of sight, out of mind. What? There's no fuel here. I don't see it. And then one day, kaboom, the whole thing goes to pot. That's what happens when we start ignoring emotion and inhibiting it and validating it. Is we're repressing it, and repressed emotion, when it comes out, man, it's not pretty. So those are some key insights there. We are never rewarded or punished into the best version of ourselves. We are relationshiped into the best version of ourselves. And I shared my story with you this morning. You know, those teachers that impacted my life, they weren't so impactful in my life because they were masters of using sticks and carrots. They had a few sticks and they had a few carrots, and they weren't afraid to use them. They know how to use them effectively, but that wasn't it. They didn't stick and carrot me into the best version of me. They relationshiped me into the best version of myself. And so it's just something to think about. You know, when we see kids that are struggling with emotion, remember that sticks and carrots, again, while there's a time and a place for them, it's probably not going to get them to peak performance academically or behaviorally, but relationships will. Relationships will. And when I guide students through managing their emotion, that's a relationship building task. Okay. So I'm going to share a couple of more key insights with you. And then for about another 10 minutes, then we'll stop and we'll do some Q&A, and then we'll call it a morning. So this idea that we're inviting, we're courageous enough to invite emotion to the table and just say, kids, whatever you feel, and we're going to deal with your feelings, right? That's scary because, again, emotion is fuel, and fuel can power lots of different behaviors. So we say, we bring all that to the table. That's deep work. That's deep work. And so here's the deal. I don't want to pour gasoline in my truck until I know how to do it safely. I don't want to hook up a stove to a propane tank unless I know how to do it safely and know how to use the stove. I don't want to plug in my computer to an electrical outlet unless I know how to use the plug and I know how to be safe. So safety is really key when you talk about dealing with these power sources like gasoline or electricity or propane gas, you know. Well, the same thing is true when I'm helping kids deal with their emotion. I want to be safe about that. I don't want to be reckless or haphazard because, again, it's an intense emotion can drive some really challenging behaviors. So I want to share with you 3 things that are really important that keep us, that increase safety as we deal with this process with students. So here we go. Number 1 is the role of language in that process, the process of dealing with emotion. What happens is when we get escalated emotionally, it impedes mediation. So what that means is the more emotional I get, the more likely I am to distort what I see and what I hear because of the emotional interference, you know. So when kids are escalating emotionally and the emotion is real high, the more I talk, the more likely I am to say something that they're going to misinterpret. So what that means is that when a student is escalating and they're really, you know, ramped up with emotion, and I start coming in and saying, come on, Adam, we can do this. Now, what are you supposed to do? Now, Adam, remember that. And I'm just talking and talking and talking and talking. That just makes them more escalated and elevated. So I need to remember that when emotion increases, my language, the amount of my language needs to decrease. And that's challenging because when kids get emotional, we as adults get emotion with them, especially if we're empathetic. You know, when their anxiety rises, our anxiety rises. And we can tend to use language to soothe ourselves until we start talking and talking just to calm ourselves down. But that language is a potential liability. So what that means is the more emotional fuel they're building up, the less language I want to use on my end, because I don't want to give that, I could say to the student, I love you and I care about you, and they're going to hear, I'm going to get you, right? Because they're distorting. So one thing in terms of from a relational safety perspective, one thing to keep in mind is that language needs to be minimal. It needs to be minimal and instructional. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is the more emotional we get, the less language I should use as the leader. Number two, the role of non-contingent communication. What is that? Non-contingent communication is communication that is not contingent on a task or an activity. So let me say it differently. Contingent communication is communication that is contingent on a task or an activity. It's linked to a task or an activity. It's what I call business management language. And so you can think of it this way, did you fill out the paperwork? Did you log on? Did you turn in the assignment? Did you check with your parents? That kind of language is business management language, and we need it, right? We need that contingent communication. But the problem with it is it's very superficial. Non-contingent communication is communication that is not contingent on a task or an activity. And it sounds like this. How was your weekend? Did you watch the game last night? How's your mom doing? Hey, how's your brother? Man, I haven't seen him for a while. Tell him I said hi. That kind of communication is not contingent on a task or an activity. And it's the kind of communication that deepens a relationship. And so I just needed to remember that the more non-contingent communication I can engage in with my students, the deeper of a relationship I can have with them. So that when they get to a place of emotional arousal, we've got this depth of relationship that sort of anchors us, versus a student that's really highly aroused and I've got this much, just a little bit of relationship. I'm not going to be a settling force for them. But the deeper the relationship I have with the student, the more settling force I can be when they escalate emotionally. And again, I develop a deeper relationship through non-contingent communication. And if you doubt that, think about, like, for those of you who have ever dated anybody, or if you're married or divorced or whatever, when you're dating somebody, man, it's a steady diet of non-contingent communication. It's just, like, what's your favorite color? What's your favorite movie? What do you want to be when you grow up? You microwave intimacy. It's all open-ended conversation. And then when you get married, you've literally created a business entity, Saenz and Saenz Incorporated. And then your communication shifts to business management language. Did you pick up the groceries? Did you pick up the dry cleaning? Did you pay rent? All of that stuff. And you've got this thing that you start managing, and then you have kids. You got to manage that. Fast forward, it's 25 years later, you're looking at the empty nest, and you say, who are you? I don't know. Like my business partner, we haven't engaged in a meaningful conversation, since the kids were born. So it just underscores this idea that non-contingent communication is what maintains intimacy and depth in a relationship. So I need to be thinking about that, especially for kids that are prone to act out emotionally. The more likely that a student is to act out emotionally, the more I need to be getting in their life and asking them open-ended questions just to get to know them, so that when they have their moment of crisis emotionally, I'll have a depth of relationship that will sustain me and keep me relationally safe in that process. So that's the role of non-contingent communication. The last one is the role of detachment, rational detachment. And what that means, rational detachment, is that as emotion spikes in students, if we're empathetic, meaning we can feel what they feel, our emotion will raise with them. And so we sort of cycle together, in terms of energy, we go up. So when they're sad, we get sad. When they're anxious, we get anxious. And that's a very empathetic, good thing. But I need to be mindful of that, because when a student is anxious, they don't need an adult who is anxious with them. They need an adult who is stable, who is a secure base that will bring them back down. When they're angry, they don't need another adult who is angry so that they can pull their anger together and find a solution. It doesn't work that way. When they're angry, they need an adult who is not angry to help bring them back down to a safe place. So if the student is up here and I'm supposed to stay at a baseline, rational detachment means me being aware of my emotions in the moment and calming them and regulating them so that I don't get sucked into my emotion. It's sort of that thing about, lifeguards, when somebody's struggling in the deep end of the water, if they get next to them, they'll say, I need you to calm down so that I can reach out and grab you. Because if you If I get too close to you and you're flailing, you're going to take me under, we're both going to die. So show me that you're going to be calm. And when you show me that you can be calm, I'll reach out and grab you. You know, it's sort of that thing. Same thing emotionally. When kids start acting out emotionally, it's so important that I maintain enough rational detachment, which means I'm detached from my emotion enough that I can stay stable for them. That's another key part of this. So again, the idea is that yes, fuel is, emotion is fuel, and that fuel can be scary and threatening. But when I do these things in my relationship with kids, you know, that these are safety factors that keep those explosions from happening, or you know, just help me to stay relationally safe in the process. Okay, so that's it. Let me pull the lens back out and go big picture. I told you that at the very beginning when I did the keynote that my goal was to help you go within yourself. And I said, man, that's going to be some hard work to go in ourselves and look at our shadow, our dark side, the things that we may not want to look at. That's hard work. So before I invite you on this journey into yourself, let me give you a compelling reason to want to do so. What is the compelling reason? Well, the compelling reason is a life like mine, a man like me, whose life was changed by teachers, you know, by educators, who did this work, you know, many, many, many years ago. So the compelling reason is that you are changing lives. You are in a position of power in your role as an educator. And that's amazing. That's amazing. So the work is so worth doing. Well, what is the work? Well, it's two things we talked about. Number one, going into the inner world, recognizing stress and then regulating stress. And then number two is going into the inner world, recognize emotion and regulating emotion. The stress management was really more focused on me as the adult. Regulating emotion, you know, I hope I've given you some practical skills to help you understand how to empower kids to regulate their emotion, but it also applies to me as an adult. So that's it. Those are the two areas that I wanted to explore in our inner worlds. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pause. We've got about 10 minutes left. I'm going to see if anybody has any questions for me. And I promise you, this will be the last time. Now, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to play lo-fi. I was going to play the Jeopardy song, but I think everybody's burned out on that. So I'm going to play lo-fi chill hop. And I see I've got a question here. What if the maladaptive behavior is sleeping because they're so exhausted from dealing with emotion? Yeah. How should that be handled? And what would a substitute be? What if drug use is something they deal with emotion outside of school? So let's start with the first part of that. Excellent question. Thank you. So what if sleeping is a maladaptive behavior? Then you address that slowly. And so let's say that I've got a student and they're sleeping most of the time in my class. And I know that it's because they're not being disrespectful. They're not being, it's just, they're dealing with a lot of emotion and they're so overwhelmed and depleted emotionally that they're going to sleep. Okay. Then I create a plan and I say, let's do a 6-week plan. Right now, today, you're sleeping 5 hours in my class. My goal is to increase the awake time. So hopefully in 6 weeks, you're only sleeping 4 hours. And then in the next 6 weeks, you're only sleeping, 3 hours. And by the end of the year, man, I would love you to be awake all day. Now, I know teachers are saying, oh, but he's got tests and, he's not learning. Well, he's not learning anyway. He's asleep. So we've got to start in these situations with extreme cases like that by figuring out where are you at, and what does progress look like for you? So, and I would just talk to them about it and say, look, man, I know you like to sleep and I don't think you're being disrespectful. You're just worn out emotionally. And I get that. So it's not fair for me to say, don't sleep in my class, but it is fair for me to say, how can we help you sleep less in my class? And let's just set some goals, So then you start shaping behavior, we're to behavior at this point, and saying, let's give you dedicated sleep times. Let's give you 15-minute naps every hour. Let's give you a half an hour nap in the morning, whatever it might be. So you start putting structure around when they can sleep and when they can be awake, and then you grow it from there. So that's how I would deal with a student who is sleeping. And then when they're awake, I would use that wake time to help them process emotions so that the emotions don't wear them out so much that make them tired. What if drug use is something that they use to deal with it outside of school? Yeah, you can talk to them and ask them about it. the bottom line is there's not a lot we can do. Like, we can't go home and police that. You know, maybe you can intervene with the parent if the parent is engaged and on board and ready to do some helpful, life-giving things that aren't rooted in punishment. But beyond that, there's not a lot we can do. And so what I would say to a student that's using drugs, because I was one of those kids, I smoked dope every day after school. I would say, you know, hey man, I don't know what homeschool is life like for you, but you know, some kids smoke dope, but they use drugs when they go home. And hey, that's between you and your parents. I'm not going to get into your world, but when you're at school, you can't do that. You can't go light up in the bathroom. You can't go shoot up or whatever. So whatever you do at home, and that's your deal, but I want to help you. I want to give you another tool. So if you use drugs to help you cope at home, okay, I'm not going to comment on that, but I'm going to comment on what you do here. You can't use drugs. So what else can we do? And I'm going to be real honest with you. I would love it, like for the things that you learn at school, I would love it if you could do it at home too. And eventually, man, what if you got to a place where the things that you do at school, you can also do those at home, and then you don't have to do drugs? Because the things I'm going to teach you, you're not going to get arrested for those things. You're not going to get sent to juvie for those things. You know, they're not illegal. You're old enough to do them, you know? So that's how I would frame it, is like, I wouldn't try to fight the power struggle of changing behavior at home. I would focus on making the most of my time at school and then invite them to consider those strategies at home as well. Great questions. Thank you so much. How can we apply to changing situation over the next 5 years? I'm not sure I understand that, sorry. On the topic of rational detachment, students, yeah, no, that's a great point. So you detach in the moment and you say, okay, I'm gonna, you know, sort of repress my emotion in this moment so I can be rational for the student. But you still got it. Like you just did that with a minute, you know, like it's okay, let me deal with the student. I'm not dealing with my emotion. It's still there though. And when I get home, it's still there. What do you do with that? I say, work it out. And I mean, physically work it out. Do push-ups, do sit-ups, go for a walk, do yoga. Find some way to flush that emotion out of your system. I talked about it this morning when I talked about stress management, but that's true with any emotion: anger, frustration, hostility, rage. Find a punching bag. I do kickboxing, you know, I punch out my bag, you know, just physically exhaust yourself. And then that's a great first step. And then just write in a journal, you know, all the things that you want to say that you can't say. And it's stuff is as brutally honest as, I can't stand that kid. I can't stand that kid. I wish that kid wasn't in my class. It's okay for you to have those. It's not okay for you to say that to the student or anyone else for that matter, but it's okay for you to have those feelings. Write them out in your journal where it's safe, and then burn the paper. You know, at least you got the feelings out at that point. So honor yourself enough to be real about what you're really thinking and feeling, and express it in a way that's safe. So start by depleting your body through physical workout and just, you know, and then even after your body's tired, you're still thinking, yeah, but I'm still thinking about that kid and I'm pissed off about it. Okay, great. Well, now go to your journal and write out everything you would want to say and everything you think is wrong with society and all that other stuff. Just word vomit onto a page and then burn the page so that nobody has to deal with it. That's how I would do it. And that's just like, this is a crude analogy, but I'm really meaningful with this. Every day I eat food and my body eats some of it, and the rest of it, I poop it out and I pee it out, just to be frank, right? And I'm not trying to be gross or vulgar, but that's with emotion. Like some of the emotion, we burn that emotion during the day, but at the end of the day, I've got to flush it out of my system, you know? And so that's how I would do it. It's just emotional hygiene is what that is. That's excellent. How do you feel about zones of regulation curriculum? I don't know that one. I know how I love my curricula, the equipped classroom. I love that one. I don't have go to my website and you can get a free sample. I love mine. So I don't know about the other one. Yeah. Thanks for asking that. Sorry. I'm going to flip over to Hoover real quick. Are there any, I don't see any questions there. Okay. Let's see. I think that's it. Any other questions? You have great ideas. Thank you that I have great ideas. All right, man. Let's see. So that's about it. We're about the end of our time. Hey, listen, thank you so much for being with me today and for all that you're doing. The last thing I'm going to say is this. In fact, I'm going to just bear with me one second. I'm going to type something into the chat for every one of you. And this is just so important. Hang on one sec. This summer, there it is. Please, 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 please love yourselves well, extravagantly, and without apology. Love yourselves this summer extravagantly and without apology. If somebody else is loving you, great, man. Good for you. But don't wait for somebody to come love you. You love yourself, and whatever self-love looks like for you, in a way that's life-giving, whatever brings you life, do that extravagantly to yourself this summer. And without, you don't owe anybody an apology for being that good to yourself, because you are so worth it. You are so worth it. And the way that you're choosing to invest your life is so worth it. Okay, that's all I got, man. Thomas, I'm going to throw it back over to you.
Thank you much, Adam. This was great. I'm so happy to have you here for the keynote and for this concurrent session.
Awesome.
I hope everybody learned something useful that they can take back with them for the next school year. We're going to break for an hour for lunchtime. Please feel free to join us at 1 o'clock for the next keynote session with Melissa Collins and Diane Smokorowski, and have a great lunch. Adam, you have a great day. Thank you again for joining us.
Y'all take care.